If you're a busy clean energy professional like me working in sub-Saharan Africa, then you would know how difficult it is to get news about our industry. You're probably following all the blogs and LinkedIn pages just to get up-to-date news. Well, we have a solution for that now. We're launching a newsletter called Clean Energy Africa that will deliver news about the clean energy sector in sub-Saharan Africa directly to your inbox 2 times a month. If you'd like to subscribe to get up-to-date news and stay on top of everything happening in the industry, then check out the link on the top of our show notes to sign up to our newsletter. Now to the episode. Hello and welcome to the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Olubumi Olajide. On this platform, we tell stories about sub-Saharan Africa's energy transition, focusing first on the policymakers, financiers, and operators that are driving us towards a sustainable energy future. This is the first of a 2-episode mini-series covering the African Mini-Grid project. The AMP is a $50 million country-led technical assistance program designed to stimulate the solar battery mini-grid market to boost electricity access in 21 African countries. The AMP is led by UNDP in partnership with RMI and supported by the Global Environment Facility. On this first episode, you will hear from 4 experts across finance, policy, and mini-grid implementation. All the interviews were recorded live from the Energy Access Investment Forum that happened in Lagos earlier in May this year. And the first voice you would hear is that of Matteo Salomon. Matteo is the Principal Technical Advisor for Climate Change Mitigation Policy and Programming at UNDP, and I'll introduce the other speakers as they come in the episode. First, we'll hear from Matteo about how he got his start in the clean energy sector.
Yeah, so actually started working in energy through climate change and the climate finance lens, particularly carbon finance. So I started working with UNDP and on development, looking at solutions to accelerate climate change mitigation and finding solutions that then combine both impacts in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and providing energy access. And that was looking at clean cooking solutions and how carbon finance can provide an additional sources of funding for clean cooking program. And that was in Central America, so far from Africa, far from Nigeria, but with very similar conditions for clean cooking in particular.
Yeah, and with all that experience that you've had, can you describe now what your role is within UNDP?
Yes, so I'm the Principal Technical Advisor for Climate Change Mitigation in UNDP. I have a global function based in UNDP's headquarters in New York, and my role mainly focuses on coordinating a global portfolio of intervention focusing on climate change mitigation, working on energy access, energy transition, energy efficiency, and sustainable transport mainly.
Okay.
So we work across 70 countries, over 100 projects, with a large amount of grant funding focusing on technical assistance and also some level of investment grants throughout our programs.
So right now we are in the UNDP and the RMI booth under the AMP banner, the African Mini-Grid program. So could you tell me how that initiative was first conceived and how this partnership between all these different organizations come together to achieve what we have now and what we're talking about on this platform?
Yeah, so the Africa Mini-Grid program is our flagship initiative on energy access for Africa. We are focusing on drivers of costs for mini-grids and how we can address the increased capital costs to finance mini-grids and renewable energy assets in the region. So through that lens of de-risking renewable energy investment, we came up with the formulation of the AMP program, looking across different markets, different level of maturity, but having a platform that can share knowledge and build a community around this topic. So we are looking at regulatory and policy framework for mini-grids, delivery models for mini-grids that can range from, a public sector lens through a full private sector lens, and of course public-private partnership across that, digitalization, business model and financial mechanisms and tools to advance mini-grids.
In Mateo's last response, he highlighted the role of regulation and policy for building and scaling mini-grid business models. I'd like us to dive deeper into that and bring in another speaker from the interviews we had. I would like to introduce Samuel Bunia. Samuel was practically born in the energy regulatory space. His father was the first chief executive officer of Uganda's electricity regulator. And although some hesitancy on his part, he eventually followed in his father's footsteps. And now he's going to be giving us an overview of what the African ecosystem is like from his role as the project coordinator at the African Forum for Utility Regulators.
I am the projects coordinator at the African Forum for Utility Regulators. Some people would say that's the projects manager.
Yeah.
Basically, because at AFU we have all four sectors. That's water and sanitation, transport, energy, and communications. First of all, everyone understands that mini-grids would help Africa answer the question of SDG 7. I mean, we're in 2024, 2030 is around the corner, but we're still behind.
Yes.
And the easiest way to get access for the so many people in Africa who don't have energy is through mini-grids, because the grids, we all know the issues with the grid extending to some of these rural areas.
Yes.
So when it comes to mini-grids, that's universally accepted. But now when it comes to policies, we all need to understand that given in our position as AFU, we deal with both Francophone and Anglophone.
Yes.
Francophone is different from Anglophone. The way they operate, the way they regulate, the way they handle their policies. There are differences there. That's one. Breaking down those differences, that's something we are all trying to do and to see how best to get over it. But then further still, it comes down to maturity of mini-grids.
Yes.
I can tell you a country like Zimbabwe, yes, they have mini-grids, but you can't compare Zimbabwe to Nigeria. Nigeria is miles ahead.
Yes.
You can't compare Kenya to the likes of Burkina Faso. Kenya is miles ahead. So there are those differences that different countries are at different levels. I can tell you there are countries which have tools, tariff tools to determine the level of tariff a mini-grid will offer its customers, their own country-specific ones. Although at AFU we have tried to create one that can be used across Africa, and it's being taken up properly and well. But aside from that, these countries also have regulations and policies that are addressing mini-grids. I know you're aware here in Nigeria, a mini-grid specific policy or renewable energy specific policy has just come about.
Yeah.
Then there are countries which have one of the two, and then there are countries which have neither. That's how Africa is right now. So it's hard to say that Africa is at the same level. Africa is at a completely different level. Every country is at a different level. If you go towards Northern Africa, they'll look at you and say, mini-grids, why are you talking about mini-grids? You know why? The level of electrification in Northern Africa is really high compared to the rest of Africa. You could also argue the same for Southern Africa, but I can tell you that Southern Africa might need them given the state of their electricity sector, their infrastructure. So it's on a whole, the continent, we accept mini-grids, but we are at different levels and need to understand that.
And now back to Mateo to talk about financing mechanisms that can allow the AMP deploy catalytic financing at scale. So speaking on those financing mechanisms, I can imagine mobilizing that much finance for projects in Africa it has its own special type of challenges. But when you're talking about across different stakeholders, what does that look like when you start the conversation? So what is the beginning point of mobilizing finances? And then we'll now get into what it's like getting it mobilized actually on the ground.
Yeah, so the global challenge that we have now is that Africa is a hotspot for renewable energy. It has a lot of potential, but the difference that exists between renewable energy investment and fossil fuel investment is the amount of capital that is required versus operational costs for the implementation of the technology. So that amount of capital requirement is very much affected by the cost of financing. And so what we are looking is what are the driver of this cost of financing and how we can reduce this driver of costs. And when you look at the difference between an investment in a fossil fuel technology and a renewable energy technology, that difference of cost of financing affect much more significantly the renewable investment. Because in a fossil fuel project, like a diesel power mini grid or a thermal power plant, the initial investment cost is much lower than for a renewable energy technology. However, the operational cost, because of the cost of the fuel, is much higher during the lifetime of the assets. For renewable energy assets, the model is the contrary. The upfront initial investment is higher, however, the operational cost is much lower. So for a higher upfront investment cost, you need to have a higher initial amount of financing for which a higher interest rate affects much more significantly than for a non-renewable technology. So what we are looking really is how we can address those issues that are driving this financial cost and reduce this financial cost to make those technology much more attractive. If you look at those two types of technology in a similar risk environment, actually solar mini grids are more competitive during the lifetime of the assets than diesel power mini grid. But in a context where financing cost is higher, this distortionate the LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity, and then solar battery renewable mini grids become more expensive. So our focus is really looking at the driver of this cost and finding solution to drive this cost down, and then making solar battery mini grids more attractive. And the reason for that is that it has less environmental and climate impact, and also the reliability and the resilience of this technology are better than diesel power mini grids that depends during the lifetime of the assets of import of fossil fuel in certain case, for countries that are not net producer of fossil fuels, or still for countries that are producer of fossil fuel, the distribution of the diesel and make it accessible to this area. So there's a lot of benefits of renewable energy mini grids versus diesel power mini grids, but that driver of cost can be an issue to make it more attractive in terms of investment perspective.
That's very well said that you've spoken a lot on the drivers. And I'm wondering, from the first iteration of the African Mini Grids programs, we were speaking to a few of your other colleagues in the RDA, especially they were telling us about how much they've deployed so far and the importance of designing policy in a way that can attract co-financing once the capital is actually put down in project. How important is it from you from the initial design phase to think about things like that? And can you tell us what the takeaways are from the first rollout of the financing you put into the African Mini Grid program? And maybe you can touch on a specific market that you think has been particularly impactful.
Yeah, so for the AMP, we have to be quite humble still because we're just starting the rollout of the financial mechanisms that we're putting in place in a number of countries. And actually the first tender that will be launched in the context of AMP will be in Nigeria, where we will be providing viability gap funding through a performance-based payment for solar battery mini grids that can support productive use of electricity with a focus in the agriculture sector. So we have learned a lot only in the design of the performance-based payment modality and how we should target it, the amount of subsidy that is still required to have tariff cost reflective mini grids that can be affordable for the communities and for the producers from the agricultural sector, and tailor this subsidy. So we hope to learn a lot more from the implementation of this subsidy that will cut across 20 mini grid side with this focus on productive use of electricity. And the reason why we are focusing so much on productive use of electricity is that it can improve the economic viability of mini grids, right? So we are looking at how those economic activities first have a more important demand compared to household energy demand. And so this increased demand can make the economics of the mini grids more viable, at the same time that they're linked to economic activity that generates income and revenue that can allow for the clients to pay for the service that they're receiving from the mini grid. So that combination of productive use of electricity and household access is essential in the design of this project that can make them economically more viable.
This is another opportunity to bring in our other speakers into this episode to talk more about the point of mini-grid business models, gearing more towards productive use that Matteo started. We're going to be bringing two people in from the mini-grid implementation stage. And we're going to be talking from representatives from Nigeria and Malawi, two programs that are at very different stages of their mini-grid implementation plans. Nigeria is a lot more advanced with a lot more sophisticated subsidy programs to support the sector and policy practices that have become guiding principles for other African markets, while Malawi is still in the very early stages of its development. We'll be speaking with Sauda, who is the Program Technical Assistant of the Africa Mini-Grid Program for the Rural Electrification Agency of Nigeria, and also with Sahidi, who is the Deputy Director of Off-Grid Electrification at the Ministry of Energy in Malawi. I'll let them both tell us how they first got into the energy sector.
So I first got introduced to energy when I was in high school in my environmental systems of societies class, and I learned about how climate change is affecting the world and how renewable energy can be a solution. And then to couple that, I am from Adamawa State, which is one of the sunniest states in Nigeria, but ironically it also has a very low source of reliable electricity, and I've always found that irony a bit confusing. Why does it have such a huge potential raw resource of solar energy but then very little reliable electricity? So from that I made my decision to study renewable energy both in my undergrad, my master's, and eventually continued my career into renewable energy.
I was introduced to the energy sector through the planning section. I'm an economist by training, so I was in the planning section in the Ministry of Energy. So under that section, we are doing planning and also policies for the energy sector. So through time, I was promoted to other positions, including leading the off-grid department. So that's how I found myself in the energy sector. The Africa Mini-Grid program in Malawi is in its early stages. Currently, we have identified some private sector companies that are working on the productive use of electricity. So their main role will be providing training in financial literacy to the communities that will be engaged in the productive use activities. But also we have others that will be conducting training in the use of the electricity itself in order to add value to agricultural produce. So these are basically the main things that we're doing on the productive use. However, we are also working with the University of Catalytic, which is our main partner doing the research and development. They'll be responsible for development of the business models that will be later replicated in other mini grids so that these mini grids become sustainable. So basically, this is what we're doing. Maybe the last one is on the digitization of the project. We're also working with one university of Cloud, whereby they are helping us in building capacity for the officers that will be implementing the project in Malawi, but also building the actual platform where the mini-grid information will be kept and accessed. So basically, that's what where we are in terms of AMP in Malawi.
So for AMP Nigeria, we were the first AMP country to start implementation, so we're a little bit more advanced. We have currently already carried out quite a bit of progress, and we have created our own purpose-built e-tendering platform that allows us to carry out our tender process completely digitally. And we've already started the tender process where we have pre-qualified 25 developers to bid for 20 pilot sites across the entire Nigeria, making sure that every geopolitical ground has been represented. And we have also carried out market intelligence and pre-feasibility studies that allow us to pick commercially viable sites to implement the mini-grid pilot project. So where we're currently at now is the second stage tender process, where we decide who the final developers will be to implement these pilot projects. And we're currently finalizing what the structure of the grant is going to look like, what the milestones would be for payment, to carrying out environmental and social impact assessments, finalizing what it goes. And once those are all sorted out, then we will proceed to the next stage of our tender process and after which we'll carry out implementation of each mini-grid and each pilot site.
This is Olu, host of the podcast, interrupting this episode to let you know that we're looking for sponsors to support our work covering the sustainable energy transition in sub-Saharan Africa. In the 5 years since starting this project, we've grown the platform to a top 10% ranked podcast globally, and we're looking to go even further. If your organization or fund would like to learn more about reaching thousands of engaged listeners monthly, then reach out to us with the email in the show notes of this episode. And for our listeners, you can continue to support us for free by sharing this episode with the people in your network, leaving a review in your favorite listening platform, and signing up to the newsletter linked in the show notes of this episode. Now back again to Matteo. What do you wish other stakeholders knew? So maybe when you're speaking with people who are coming from a purely commercial mindset and they are just looking at deploying capital in things that will bring them returns, what is the conversation like when you're telling them about the African Communicate program? And then we look at the reverse side of the local regulators, the policymakers and the government. Are there any thoughts that they share, or where are the large divergences that you've seen, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, so I think there are many aspects, right, that needs to still be understood by the different stakeholders. On the financier side and investor side, I think there's often the misconception that because we are working with poor households and in rural context and in a development context, that the ability to pay is limited, and that there is important risk of lack of payment. And I think this is a misconception, because energy is so much needed in this community that often the communities have to pay higher price and higher cost for access to electricity through different means and different technologies, that once energy is available in the communities, there is a strong interest to make sure that they're able to fulfill the payment requirement and to access that electricity. So this become part of their livelihood, and it also generate opportunity to generate more revenues to be able to pay for this electricity. So that's, I think, one of the misconceptions that we often see, that there is a higher risk to work in poor communities because of the ability to pay. But I think this can be addressed through different mechanisms. There's also different technologies such as prepayment that can ensure that the energy consumed is paid for, and different type of mechanism. But I also think conceptually the need is so high that these services will be well received when made available.
Yeah. So now on the flip side for local regulators, is it a similar challenge of there being some misconceptions, or is it a completely different challenge there?
So, on the regulator, I think the challenge now is to look at territorial approaches where you can combine different type of interventions and different group of stakeholders to which you will be providing energy services. So combining commercial and industrial clients, households, rural households, urban areas, etc., in a broader geographic area that can combine different type of clients, different type of technologies, and different level of consumption, combining mini grids with interconnected mini grids, independent mini grids, solar home system, again, standalone solar in an area where potentially a single developer can provide this array of technology and array of services for a utility or for a distributor across a geographical area, and combining and aggregating those different technology to be able to diversify the portfolio and reduce the risk, with the requirement of providing certain level of energy services across a range of clients.
Yes.
So I think that's the future challenge, where we need to move from an approach where we look at a single technology, a single geographical area through the tendering process, having a broader vision of how you can electrify or provide reliable electricity services through a broader geographic area, and distribute the risk and technology and clients.
As Matteo pointed out, having a broader view on both technology, business models, and policy is important to make sure the implementation scales to reach the most amount of people possible. We have to keep in mind that impact is the end goal for AMP and other programs like it, which is why I want to bring it back to Samuel to talk to us about how difficult it can be, and also the opportunities in trying to get multiple stakeholders to align on directions and to avoid duplication of work. So now, back to Samuel. And on the practical sense, what does it look like when you're talking with different stakeholders from different markets and trying to get them to align on mini-grid policy? You mentioned about trying to make there's a one framework for setting tariffs in mini-grids across Africa. So what are the challenges there, and what are the future opportunities you're seeing with the engagement and the conversations actually happening?
Okay. If I start with the challenges, the first thing I would mention is information asymmetry. Different stakeholders have different information, some more than others.
Yes.
Yet, to ensure mini-grids are successful, everyone needs to be on a level playing field. That's one. Two, because of this information asymmetry, you could say it's actually caused due to a lack of communication. And when I say communication, I don't mean the obvious communication. Obvious, I need my tariff reviewed, here's the data, go away.
Yeah.
I mean communication that's open and candid.
Yes.
You'll find in countries, developers don't want to talk to the regulator. Or if they talk to the regulator, they get a stiff back. And you'll find the regulators like, we want these guys to talk to us, they're not talking to us.
Yes.
And for me, in my role at AFU, and I've seen it with the number of collaborators we have had, we prefer open and candid conversation. When I say open and candid conversation, it means that if you talk to me, I will tell you good things, and I will definitely tell you bad things that you don't want to hear.
Yeah.
And vice versa. But it's incumbent on both of us not to take offense, but to say, okay, we have bad things, how do we sort it out? And that's, for me, that's where the major opportunity is. In terms of collaborations, I could tell you that the interventions on this continent are numerous. We have the likes of UNDP AMP. They're doing a great job answering this question of mini-grids. You have the likes of Get Transform, great job. You have the likes of FCDO, great job. USAID. So many people are answering this question of mini-grids, even the AFDBs of this world. But at the end of the day, you find that sometimes we are all duplicating what we are doing.
Yes.
There's an opportunity for us to sit down and collaborate. I can tell you AMP has more capacity in certain areas than AFU. AFU has more capacity in other areas. So that, and you see us collaborating with them, we feed off each other.
Yeah.
Where they can they can handle it better or deal with it better. We just say, okay, fine, we'll escort you there and you deal with it better. Where it's the vice versa, they escort us, we deal with it better. We have talked about the tariff methodology. Speak to any developer on this continent, any developer who wants to go across borders. They'll tell you that one of the headaches they face is You go to, let's say, Uganda, where I'm from, the methodology is like that, the regulations or the policy guiding is like that. But then just cross over to DRC, it's something completely different.
Yeah.
And it's a headache. So at AFO, what we even tried to do, and it's something we showcased to the AMP country windows a few weeks ago, is that it is possible to have a foundation that's similar. But we also accept that there are a few differences here and there.
Yeah.
But if the foundation is similar, you're sorting out a lot of issues. So that's another opportunity, finding the similarities across Africa.
Yeah.
I can tell you in my interactions with the various regulators across the continent, as we were doing the first phase of our mini-grid project, we found that the issue in Uganda is similar to the issue in Nigeria. Maybe the scale is different, but it's similar. The issue in Sierra Leone is similar to the issue in Burkina Faso. Scale is different, similar issue. When you interact, when you get them around the same table, they say, you also face that issue.
Yeah.
How did you deal with it? You're further ahead in the maturity levels. So those are some of the opportunities that are there. One, with finding a foundation for some of these policies and tools that's similar, but still accepts the few differences that are there. Two is engaging in collaborative discussions that are open and candid. And three, which for me is very important, is ensuring there's more information and knowledge sharing. It's why I actually love what AMP is doing. It's similar to what we're doing. It's similar to what I think AFDB, Get Transformed, the likes, they're doing. And for us, it even got us thinking, we need to sit at the same table so that we don't step on each other's toes, so that we don't repeat what we're doing. Because ideally, we're all dealing with the same people.
We've covered quite a lot on this episode already, from the policy to finance to mini-grid local level implementation. And now we're going to go back to Matteo to tell us what he's looking forward to for the rollout of the AMP program pilot stage and how he looks towards the scale up. Yeah, so with the rollout of the pilot for the Africa Mini-Grid Nigeria that's starting out, what are the factors that you're going to be looking at very, very closely to determine what can be replicated in the other regions under the AMP, or just specific things or specific like markers / milestones that you are hopeful that can be reached through this program, just to understand how this can be adapted as well to the other markets, as I said, but also to kind of like validate the model that you're going into this pilot with.
Yeah. So one thing we very much value from the pilot in Nigeria is that is a private sector focused pilot. So we are really trying to engage private developer in providing those services with this viability gap funding. So we will provide this subsidy to improve the economics of the interventions, but still it will be a private sector solution, and we expect private sector co-financing and investment as well as part of this pilot. So there will be skin in the game from the developer in this project, and we want to look at different aspects in terms of payment and tariff recollection mechanism, also how the productive use appliances and applications are improving the economic viability of the mini-grids, how it's affecting the load and the demand from the mini-grids, and how it's also contributing to the improvement of livelihood in the areas where this mini-grid is developed. So we believe that the access to reliable electricity will enable the communities to also improve their economic activities. So this is something we will also monitor closely to see how indeed the energy provided can improve livelihoods and the overall welfare of the communities where we will deploy the mini grids. And this will also be important lessons for other projects in Nigeria but across the region as well.
Yes, very well said, Matteo. And now we've reached the end of the interview. There is a question that we told you about in advance, so you could have a think through, and which is, with all the conversations we've had with the different stakeholders, we see how important the mission is, but also the core challenges that exist at every phase. So now, with all that in mind, with the work you're doing, how would you define failure?
So the good thing is that we already have failed. So going forward, I hope we can only do better. And when I say we already have failed, is that, we still have hundreds of millions of people without access to electricity in 2024. This is unacceptable. We have the technology, we have the means to deploy this energy to the population without access. So we are closing a decade of sustainable energy. This year we have the SDG 7, which are our North Star in terms of targets for energy access and energy transition, and we're still far away from meeting these goals. So I think failure has happened. We have failed to reach the targets that we had established for ourselves for energy access today, but we are seeing positive evolution in the market that gives us hope for the future, and we really are looking forward to be able to close that energy access gap in the next years before 2030 and reclaim those targets.
As you've obviously heard throughout this episode, this was recorded live on the floor during a conference in Lagos for the Energy Access Investment Forum. I want to thank everybody that took their time out to sit down with us at the AMP booth to record these sessions. And as we round out this first episode of our two-part mini-series, I want to bring in Samuel, Sauda, and Saidi to give their own responses to how we define failure. And I'll see you again next week for the second episode. Have a wonderful week, everybody.
Well, number one, ideally, failure is not an option.
Yeah.
Because everyone needs energy.
Yes.
Yeah? Everyone needs energy, whether for productive uses, whether for domestic use. But personally, if I'm to look at failure, it would be that the person, in Uganda we call like a grandparent, an elder, a jaja. So for me, failure would look like I go to visit my jaja and I don't see him having any light bulb in his house. I go to visit my jaja, he can't charge his phone. He has to probably send someone to the local town nearby to charge his phone. That's failure. For me, I see failure when the regulators cannot stand up to the central government and say, look, the tariff is high, yes, but this tariff is cost reflective and it shows that the developer is getting back something. I see failure as the inability to find subsidies that can maybe lower the tariff. And more than that, I see failure as mini grids failing to break through the environment in Africa and electrify people. For me, that is what failure would be. In a nutshell, it's just defined as not everyone having access to electricity. I shouldn't be up in the plane and I look down and I see, oh, okay, I know this isn't a water body, but it's dark, and I know there are houses there. That's failure to me. Yeah, so I think that's how I'd look at it. So that's why I say failure isn't an option. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if we can go first or ladies first. Okay, in terms of failure, I think I define failure as not achieving the targets that we set. So as we're implementing projects, we have some targets, and in terms of impact and the numbers that we intend to achieve by the end of implementing the interventions. So if we don't achieve these, then I'll take it as failure.
That's very well said. I think for us, I would say that for me, failure would look like not learning anything new from this program. It would look like finishing the project and not having anything that can be impactful for the sector, anything that can move the sector forward. Because I think the major focus for us at the AMP is the learnings that we're getting from this. These are pilot projects. They're not large-scale projects. So whatever learnings we're getting, we wanted to be able to go towards scaling up in the sector. So failure would look like not producing any useful or valuable knowledge that can contribute towards scaling up mini-grids, especially achieving a universal access across the country and the continent at large.